Jiří Procházka is a modern-day samurai, UFC fighter, and multi-world champion. He's one of the most unique athletes I've ever seen, having spent some time in Japan, where he started exploring his mind, his ego, and his own consciousness, ultimately trying to become the perfect warrior. He also spent time studying the Bushido code and the way of the samurai, implementing ancient Japanese philosophy into his fight style. Today, he's training to become the light heavyweight champion of the UFC, which would realize his goal of becoming the world's ultimate fighter. Not too long ago though, he was just a troubled kid. He's had a long journey to get here. Today we're going to be exploring the life of Jiří Procházka, taking a look at his journey and how he became the samurai that he is today. This is the Jiří Procházka story. You guys already know what to do. Hit that like button real quick and let's get into it. It all started on October 14th of 1992 in a town called Znojmo of Czech Republic. His father had passed away at the age of 6, causing some turbulence in his life as a youngster. Growing up, he was a completely different person. He was actually a regular kid. He was a class clown and didn't take anything in his life seriously. He was always an athlete though, saying he used to ride BMX and played other sports like floorball and soccer. Like I said, Jiří got himself into a lot of trouble as a teenager. He'd get into fights everywhere he went, at school, in clubs, parties, even on the soccer field. He would constantly get kicked out of soccer games for fighting and get into fights every time he went out to party with his friends. However, he said that he always had respect when he fought. He wouldn't take cheap shots or hit anybody while they were down, having some kind of honor for his opponents, something that he carries with him to this day. He seems to have always had that fighting instinct though. Little did he know that one day he learned to master it and become a worldwide champion. Jiří first started training in combat sports in high school. In his freshman year, training wrestling, but then focused and continued training in karate, judo, and Muay Thai. He said he fell in love with it from the moment he stepped foot into the gym. He saw how hard everybody was training and how the energy was just flowing freely in the room. It was a way for him to release the energy and aggression that he had built up. Also, a way to push himself to the max, and that's exactly what he needed at the time. It taught him discipline, responsibility, and taught him how to be accountable for his actions, turning him from a troublesome boy to a man. This is around the time where Jiří began looking inwardly, exploring his mind and emotions, starting on his lifelong journey of self-mastery. As he progressed with his training, he began getting in less and less trouble in the outside world, as he was learning to channel his emotions into something positive. This would be the beginning of a long road that he's still walking on today. He started training, studying, evolving. His skills improved rapidly and pretty quickly got good enough to take up his first pro fight. At 20 years old in 2012, he fought his first professional fight in Gladiator FC, the biggest fight organization in his country at the time. He didn't spend too much time in the octagon though. He knocked his opponent out in the first minute of the first round. Even though he had won his fight, he felt like he was drowning. He said that when he stepped into the octagon, he felt like he was fighting for his life, overwhelmed by panic and fear, having little control of what he was actually doing in there. He was happy he won, but he realized that he had to overcome his emotions if he wanted to truly feel in control in the octagon. As hard on himself as he was though, his next 3 fights all went the same way, finishing his opponents all within the first round. 4 months into his pro career, he had fought 4 times, amassing a perfect record of 4-0. He felt more calm and confident every time he stepped into the cage, every time having a little bit more control over his emotions and his mind. The more relaxed he was in the fight, the better he performed. He recovered better, breathed better, and would fight more calculated instead of reacting out of panic. He continued training, fighting, and improving, making his way up the ranks in Gladiator FC. In only a year and a half since his pro debut, he'd fought 9 times, building a record of 7-2, getting every one of his wins within the first round. Jiří's career was off to an amazing start. After stringing together an impressive record over the past 2 years, he found himself at the top of the division. He was next in line to challenge for the title. It was a long journey to get here, but in December of 2013, Jiří faced veteran and then champion Martin Solch, the toughest fight of his career. He started the fight strong, landing vicious knees, kicks, and finding beautiful openings in his opponent's defense. It was a tough fight though. Both fighters ended up landing dangerous blows, making it all the way to the 3rd round, the longest Jiří had been in a fight in his pro career. He was up for the challenge though. In the 3rd round, he found the opening he'd been looking for, landing a brutal flying knee, sending his opponent down in the canvas where he finished him via TKO. Only 2 years into his pro career, just after turning 21 years old, Jiří became a champion for the first time. He then went on to defend his title a few times, continuing his habit of finishing his opponents in the first round. It'd only been a few years since he began his journey, but he'd become a world champion and evolved tremendously as a person in that time. By December of 2015, Jiří would take the next step in his career and life. He was offered to travel to Japan to fight in the Rizin Fighting Federation, Japan's leading MMA promotion. This opened up a whole new world to him. He traveled to Japan where he would study the Bushido code, making the way of the samurai his way of life. 1 year before arriving in Japan, one of his coaches had gifted him the Book of Five Rings, introducing Jiří for the first time to the samurai's way and the code of Bushido. He began studying and living by these philosophies, claiming that they saved his life. The Book of Five Rings was written by one of the most notorious samurais of Japan, Miyamoto Musashi, one of Jiří's biggest inspirations. Musashi was a lone warrior, reigning undefeated in over 70 battles. These fights weren't stopped by referees or rules though, they were to the death. To live to tell the tale after 70 fights was unheard of. After his life as a samurai, he'd seclude himself to a cave in the mountains, where he would go on to writing about his life philosophy, which ended up becoming the Book of Five Rings. Studying these philosophies gave purpose and meaning to his fight career. To him, fighting became something much more sacred than the simple thought of punching somebody in the face. He wanted to become the perfect warrior, and would spend years mastering himself in order to do that. He says that the samurai's way is the way of death, because to become a samurai meant to choose between life or death, and the samurai had chosen to die. When he'd make that choice, he no longer had anything to lose. He'd become free of all attachments, family, emotions, possessions, everything. Having nothing to lose meant you could dedicate everything to becoming a warrior. There was no room for error. He started meditating. This would allow him to study his emotions, his mind, and behavior, allowing him to make choices based on free will and not fear. It started opening him up to new levels of experience and consciousness. The pre-programmed, unconscious beliefs he had about life started to dissolve, allowing him to break free from the robotic existence that most people live in. It opened his eyes to a whole new world to which he was blind before. Once he'd learned these philosophies, his life would never be the same. He devoted his entire life to learning and studying, which is ultimately what transformed him into the warrior that he is today. He studied the mind, attempting to overcome it. He came to the realization that we are not our thoughts. The mind is just a database of previous life experiences. When we free ourselves of our mind, we begin to see the world completely differently. We see it how it truly is, without the judgment or biases. We begin to find our true selves, the silence that lies beneath the noise of daily life. When we begin to realize this, we could start making decisions and leading our life based on free will and not fear. Ultimately, this is the goal of spiritual practice, to experience life to the fullest in every moment, something that's impossible to do when your mind is constantly clouded by thoughts of fear, worry, and doubt. This way of thinking also allowed Jiří to detach himself from the position he was in, detach himself from becoming a champion or the accomplishments that he was chasing or he's had already. It allowed him to see things as they truly were, which gave him the vision and determination to ultimately become the best fighter in the world. This was what would become his life's work, not the possessions or accomplishments, but simply becoming the best warrior and human being that he could be. In 2015, he competed in the Rizin Grand Prix, fighting 3 times in 2 days. He won 2 of those 3 fights, losing only to Mohamed Lawal, his first loss in years. He continued on his path of self-mastery and moving his way up the ranks in Rizin, putting together an impressive 7-fight win streak across the next 4 years, which improved his pro record to 23-4-1. At the end of that list of wins and couple years of fighting and training, his next fight would be once again against Mohamed Lawal, attempting to avenge his loss, this time for the light heavyweight title. The work that he'd done on himself since they last met had paid off, as he won the fight and avenged his loss, winning via TKO in the 3rd round. It took some time, but Jiří was once again crowned champion for the 2nd time. From that point on, he had 2 fights left in Rizin, winning one at catchweight and another at light heavyweight, defending his title. After a long 5-year journey at Rizin that had profoundly changed his life, his contract came to an end and he vacated his belt. It was time to begin the next chapter. He says that his ultimate goal is to spread the knowledge that he's been learning over the years, sharing it with the world and eventually wanting to raise the consciousness of the entire planet. His mission was more spiritual than material, but he realized that in order to spread his message on the highest level, he had to become the best, most popular fighter in the world. And the only way to do that was to join the UFC. Later on that year, he'd go on to sign with the UFC after vacating his belt in Japan. He made his promotional debut against former light heavyweight title challenger Volkan Ozdemir in July 2020. He disposed of his opponent quickly in the first round and was awarded a Performance of the Night bonus for his victory. That year, he was also named one of the top 10 newcomers in the promotion. In only his second fight in the UFC, Jiří faced two-time light heavyweight champion title challenger Dominic Reyes, who was also an inspiration to Jiří at the time. This would also be the first fight where he'd sport his war hair, which he said was inspired by ancient Muay Thai warriors. He says that when you're ready to fight, you need to look like a fighter, like a warrior, and that energy will translate in the fight. It was a back and forth fight where he took a bit more damage than he'd like to. Regardless, he'd see an opportunity and landed a brutal spinning back elbow, knocking Reyes out cold. Procházka took home another Performance of the Night award, as well as a Fight of the Night bonus award. He says even though he knocked his opponent out and won the fight, he was extremely disappointed with the performance. He'd taken more damage than he wanted to and took that as motivation to get back to camp and improve. He's currently scheduled to fight UFC light heavyweight champion Glover Teixeira on May 7th. Nearly a decade after beginning his MMA journey, and Jiří would put everything he's learned up to this point to the test, attempting to become the world champion of the largest fight organization in the world. His vision and dream of becoming the best warrior in the world is starting to come to fruition. He has one fight left until it's been realized. He's given up everything to become the best fighter he can, including family, relationships, possessions, and anything that would distract him on his path to mastery. He's detached from it all, which is also what allows him to become the warrior that he wants to be. He's a possible future UFC light heavyweight champion and one of the most skilled, unique fighters I've ever seen. This has been the Jiří Procházka story. If you guys liked the video, make sure you smash the like button if you haven't already, and leave a comment of who we should make a video of next. I want to make videos you guys want to see, so let me know. But other than that, I'm out, guys. Take it easy.